we're in the midst of ideological polarization, the impact of the Eurozone debt crisis on national party politics. And we have three speakers from this panel as well. We will keep the same format, which Vasilis tried to set up from the academic. I find it quite academic, but it doesn't matter the format that we have. So we start with Catherine Vries, a professor of European politics at the University of Oxford. Catherine, you have like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I will try to be quite strict now this time, in honest to Vries, because we are playing against it.
Very good, thank you.
Yellow card, red card.
I didn't prepare the yellow card.
Thank you very much for coming after lunch. I was a bit tired, so I tried to be a little bit upbeat. Thanks again to the organizers for inviting me on such a very interesting discussion already, and I hope even more interesting. And I'll try to be a bit provocative as well. I'm an optimist, but what I'm going to tell about, or what I'm going to discuss with you today, is not very positive. Contrary to what we've heard a little bit this morning, my tale of the rise of extremist politics in Europe, or mostly in Western Europe, is not that positive. I'm going to take up the analogy of the football team this morning, and I'm going to reach it out a little bit. Imagine political elites or political parties as the coaches and citizens as the football players. Well, many citizens have felt that they've been on the bench for a very, very long time. They've been sold out by mainstream political elites that don't care about their problems, but care about JP Morgan, care about the EU, care about all things that are very distant from their own lives. And I'm doing this, provocative to get a discussion. They hide behind very difficult language, but basically the message is the same. They don't care about them. Then there have been other parties that have come up that have tried or have been able to take them off the bench. These citizens don't need 100 million like Bale to be transferred to Real Madrid. They very, very easily change teams. So that's the rise of extremist politics is what I'll talk about today. Some of you may think, well, Catherine, the German election that just came about, that is, a spark of hope. I just want to recall the 2010 Dutch election, where we said exactly the same thing. The extremists lost out, the mainstreamists won. Now, 3 years later, the two big, so the grand coalition also of the right and the left, the two parties in the polls are now scoring 29 seats. Wilders is scoring between 35 and 45 seats, depending on which poll you believe. It's not an election, but it just shows how fast that can change as well. So the title of my presentation, and I hope to keep it as brief as possible, is A Touchstone of Dissent, European Integration and Issue Entrepreneurs. And I will call them issue entrepreneurs. I'm not going to put a value label on them as populist right or radical left or all these type of things, but it's going to be these type of parties that have sought out particular niches that are no longer niches, I think, electorally, and have mobilized issues that do not nicely fit in what one might call state intervention in the economy or left-right politics or these kind of more traditional themes that we know. Some of these parties you can see here, and I'm going to focus on Europe specifically today because that's the topic of our discussion. Giving you Ireland and France, Sinn Féin, Front National, or the UK Independence Party in the UK, or the Socialist Party is my favorite. Very small person with a big EU sign on his back, and it says, "The Euro, do you feel it too?" So how does Europe hit home? So the topic of this panel was, how does Europe feed into domestic party competition? What's very difficult about the EU issue, and I'm going to treat it not multidimensionality, but just more like kind of pro or anti-EU. It might take on the form of austerity, it might take on the form of institutionalization. I'm just going to simplify a little bit. So if you think about politics as a traditional left-right, I'm not saying that these themes still mean the same thing than they did maybe in the 70s, but nonetheless we think about a main competition of politics, which is state intervention in the economy usually. The EU doesn't fit very nicely on that dimension. What you're seeing is that extreme left parties and extreme right parties, taking two examples from the country that I'm from, the Socialist Party, former Maoist party in the Netherlands, that has revamped itself, which would be an extreme left party, Geert Wilders' party, the Party for Freedom, which is a radical right party, both oppose European integration for very different reasons, right? So European integration as something that's foreign, something that we don't want, and we don't want to take care of ourselves, national sovereignty, Geert Wilders. The left very much like the left also in France, remember the kind of the constitutional referendum, it was about the sellout to a neoliberal Europe. Austerity measures that are not seen as part of left-wing ideology or socialist ideology. Nonetheless, what it shows is that, well, where the mainstream party maybe reluctantly have to be pro-EU because they're negotiating in Brussels, and I don't think that so many government parties are so Europhobe. Most of them are quite Europositive. What you see on the left extremes and the right extremes is quite this Europhobia, to take that term. So when you have two dimensions in politics, if you're a rational choice theorist, I'm not going to bore you with that, you see that's not probably a stable equilibrium. Because you can't really compete very nicely on two different dimensions, because it's going to split your constituents. It's unclear who your voters are, right? So what parties try to do, mainstream parties, they try to, it's for you, the right, they try to fan in the issue of European integration into their existing profiles. Say, well, this is what I think about Europe, I'm a more market party, hence, therefore, I favor this. Maybe the Social Democrats are a bit more skeptical because they try to kind of either not talk about the EU or link them up in existing ideology. Because that's not the message they want to be talking about. They want to talk about their core issues. For a challenger party, those what I would dub as an issue entrepreneur, oh no. They are losers on the left-right dimension. They don't have any profile. Usually they're new parties that have nothing else than the EU to talk about, or the EU and immigration. They want to be, making the main axis of competition this EU issue that splits the existing minorities and carve out the differences in government parties or between coalition partners. Because it's a touchstone of dissent, it might be something that they can electorally gain from. And the question that I'll talk about today, and I'm not going to talk about the Euro crisis now. I think we shouldn't obsess only about the crisis, what's happening now. I'm just going to give you a perspective. The data comes from 1984 to 2010. It's how the EU as an issue started to emerge in domestic competition. And this happened well before the Euro crisis. This started to happen in many countries about 2002. That was prior, maybe the introduction of the Euro, but not necessarily the Euro crisis. So, under which conditions does this EU issue then venture in? I'm not going to talk so much about theory. The assumptions that I'm going to make, and that's maybe controversial, is that the EU as a position issue, more or less EU, more or less behaves like any other issue. I could have, on the graph before, I could have given you immigration. I could have given you environment. All kinds of issues that are not easily subsumed into the left-right dimension. And then secondly, that if you want to introduce a new issue in multi-party competition, where you're part of the status quo and have to go into a coalition government negotiation afterwards, you want to be talking about the issues that your coalition partners also are talking about. You don't want to upset the status quo too much. So it's particularly difficult to introduce a new issue in that kind of system. And to this date, I'm going to talk more about Western Europe. That's the data that I have. To this date, Spain is the only country that has not really governed by coalition. So this is something that lines up in every system. So the bottom line is that losing parties, and I will discuss what these are, and that's the particular issue entrepreneurs, and that's going to be those type of campaign posters that we saw before, introduce the EU issue when they can win votes, when they're close to the mean voters. So that may have changed, that they're now closer to the voters than they were. When it splits the mainstream, and when they themselves hold unified positions. If those conditions are met, you see a lot of mobilization on the EU, and it can cause serious damage in domestic party competition, at least damage in the sense of upsetting the existing arena. So I'm going to talk a little bit about issue entrepreneurship. That's, I have to stress, this is work that I've not only done myself, but it's work that I've done with Sarah Hobart, who's at the European Institute at the LSE. Sorry, I forgot to say that. So the kind of what we try to work at, or what's the dependent variable, what we try to understand is who introduces the EU issue, why is it successful, under which conditions, and to what goal or to which purpose they're doing that. And how we kind of define this is not only talking about the EU, but as in any other issue that doesn't fit nicely in the left-right, as issue entrepreneurship. This is a political strategy by parties which mobilize new policy issues or not nicely fitting policy issues that the mainstream has ignored and adopt a policy position that's different from the mainstream. Hence, in the case of the EU, this means always Eurosceptic, because all governments have been pro-EU. That's why we hardly see any pro-EU mobilization, because it's done by the government parties. Has then two key components. Mobilization. You start to talk about different issues than left-right type of issues, and you want to introduce disagreement, conflict, right? So that's the kind of politicization strategy, a little bit of what we were discussing this morning. So who would do that? So what we argue is that these will be political losers, parties that are more likely to become issue entrepreneurs when they're losers on the mainstream dimension, when they're not really talking about the left-right, when they were parties that hold very weak electoral standings on the left-right, when they're new parties, when they don't nicely fit on this traditional dimension, and when these losing parties can win. Because you're not going to do it when you're already a small party or a new party if you can't gain any traction, right? You need to get something out of it. You want to get into parliament, you want to maybe get as many votes as possible, and perhaps you want to introduce policy or enter office at a particular moment in time. And the things that we're going to focus on are when you're close to voters, that's something with which you can gain votes, right? That you're not yourself internally divided, because then you get into the Conservative Party discussion on the EU, right? Half of the party wants this, half of the party wants that. That is a major electoral liability. And what you do is especially interesting to mobilize a new issue on which you're close to the mean voter if the rest of the opposition that you're trying to win against is divided on the issue. It's like double jeopardy, right? So how would we define loss in this multi-party competition? Well, those are parties mainly that have never been in office, that hold extreme positions to the mean party in parliaments. That's why they cannot get anything through parliament, because they're never going to get a winning majority. And they are far away on the left-right, i.e. they're on the extremes of the left-right, so never close to the mean voter on the left-right. Right? So they hold more extreme positions. And we know in voting behavior that people don't like to overshoot their policy platforms by going to two extremes. So then the question is, what is this winning issue? And I'm going to go through and show you some data. Well, a party is more likely to act as an issue entrepreneur, in our case, to mobilize the EU issue when the distance to the mean voter, to the average voter, is very small, right? Because then it means that I'm mobilizing something in which I can win, in which I can get some platform from. You do it especially when your opposition is divided, when it's a wedge issue. And you are less likely to do it when you yourself are divided. You're not going to pick any issue. You're going to pick an issue on which you're united. Hence, that's why the EU is so interesting for radical left and radical right, because they don't have any divisions in their ranks, or hardly any divisions in their ranks. And then we expect that if you're a loser, all of these effects should be more pronounced. But that's a small side effect. So I'm going to just go through the test of the model. So this is basically trying the argument that I'm trying to do. And sorry, it's a bit of an academic talk, but I think it makes some general contributions, I hope. Whoops. So the case, you look at the EU. We've also looked at the green issue. We've looked at some immigration data, but I'm going to focus on the EU specifically. So we use data from expert surveys, that's to get party positions on the EU from Eurobarometer surveys. And we have 14 Western European countries between 1984 and 2010. We wanted to get a long time span to see if this EU mobilization started earlier. We don't put in East European countries because at the time sometimes they were not, the first founding elections were not very clear-cut electoral outcomes or stable party systems. If we look at a small time span, it also works for the East, but I'm just going to focus more on the West. And then we use a time series model to do that. So just a little bit of a sense what I said before, if you want to measure issue entrepreneurship, what we want to see is that you mobilize the issue, that's the SP, the salience of this issue, should increase, and then you're going to take a different stance from the mainstream. So this is the mainstream party position, often the government, right? Minus your position. So what you're trying to do is not trying to sell or highlight an issue on which the issue stand is already taken in the system, right? So if the mainstream party is Europositive, you're more likely to gain by being Eurosceptic, right? And then one would think, we thought about doing an absolute, both sides, but there's no absolutes, right? I mean, there's only people who are issue entrepreneurs who are mobilizing the EU. The only thing they're mobilizing is anti-EU, some of the resonation of what we heard this morning. Independent variables, so political loss, we look at are you more likely to mobilize an anti-EU stance when you've never been in government, when you're far away from the mean party on the left-right, when you're far away from the mean voter on the left-right, when you're close to the mean voter on the EU, when you're not internally divided on the EU, but when everybody in competition, or the mainstream competition, is divided on the EU. And that's what we're going to test. So to just give you an example, and this on the x-axis, so the negative sign, there's a negative effect. So if, for example, you're in opposition and you're less likely to mobilize the EU, your coefficient should be on this side, whereas the positive effect is on the other side. So as we predicted, parties that have never been in government show a very clear, it's actually the strongest effect, a very clear likelihood of being an issue entrepreneur, of mobilizing the EU issue and also mobilizing the Eurosceptic sense of that. We don't find any effect for the distance of the party voters, if it's their own constituencies, that doesn't really matter. But we do find this effect for the distance of the mean voter. So if you're far removed from the mean voter on the left-right, and when you don't hold a winning position electorally on the left-right, you're more likely to mobilize a new issue. And we also control for party size. So this is in line with the idea that losers on the existing dimension, they've never been in government, they are far away from the mean party, but we don't find so much evidence for them, but especially when they're far away from the mean voter on the traditional dimension, they're more likely to introduce a new issue and do that in a conflictual way. So then looking at this winning proposition, is it also true that those people who are issue entrepreneurs, that they are more likely to be issue entrepreneurs when they're close to the mean voter, when they're less internally divided, and maybe also the party voter? We looked at that, then we don't have to look at it. So here you have to realize this is the distance to the mean voter, right? So if you're far away on the EU, you're much less likely to be an issue entrepreneur, to mobilize the EU issue and be Eurosceptic about it, because you're very far away from the EU. It has no electoral, it's not an electoral asset for you, right? Also, it's negative when you yourself are internally divided. So it makes sense that those people who are more likely to mobilize the EU issue in a negative sense, so being Eurosceptic, are those that are close to the mean voter and that are not internally divided. So the last thing what we want to look at, and now I put it in the graph, is if these losing parties that are more likely to mobilize the EU issue when they're close to the mean voter and when they're not internally divided, if they're also more likely to mobilize the issue when their mainstream competitors are dissentious, are divided on the issue. And here would be this is the effect of when the mainstream parties in the system are divided on the issue, how likely is it that you'll be an issue entrepreneur? Not really anything going on for government parties or mainstream opposition parties. But for these challenger parties, so these parties who are losers in the system, have never been in government, far away from the mean party and far away from the mean voter on the left-right, they are very likely to mobilize the EU issue when the mainstream is divided. Because it's a wedge issue, they can capitalize on the internal rifts of their competitors. And this is the same graph. So, competition on the EU issue in domestic politics, taking a very long period of almost 30 years. Who does it? So in keeping with some literature, we argue that losers on the mainstream dimension are most likely to mobilize an issue like the EU, which does not fit nicely into existing party competition. How do these challenger parties, these losing parties, do it? By both weighting the attention of the EU issue, by taking a competing stance on the issue compared to the mainstream, i.e. through a strategy of issue entrepreneurship. Why do they do it? They do it to unseat the existing status quo, gain votes, and perhaps maybe also mobilize some issues. This was, we don't know that, right? If they're sincere ideologically about their anti-EU stance, probably they are too, but we didn't test that. And when did they do that? They do that when they can win, when they're close to the mean voter on the issue of the EU, when the mainstream competitors are divided, and when they themselves hold a unified position. And the last thing is to shout out to my co-author, who's also worked on some of this. Thank you very much for your attention.
I get my question here, and something that I've been struggling with in terms of conceptually as well. So, are your issue entrepreneurs populists, extremists, or both? And so, in a sense, is there a distinction between these two concepts? I mean, my thesis is that a party like Panteion, for example, that has been advocating, is very anti-immigration, very isolationist, has adopted very isolationist foreign policy, advocates, exit from the EU, from NATO, from all international institutions. It does advocate a very internally consistent agenda. So, in that sense, I don't think it's populist. I don't know. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
So very short, and I think it's a very, very, very important question and a very difficult question to answer because of what is populism. And I mean, I know. So my answer would be they're clearly extremist because that would be the incentive. That's the entire story about them having an incentive. If they're populist, it very much, of course, depends on your definition of populist. What I can say of doing some in-depth interviewing and some reviewing of some of the material of some of these parties, not all of them, but some, so I would say they have to be extremist. They don't necessarily have to be populist, but what you do see is that it's a lot of parties have very easy solutions, right? So in that way, if you associate that with populism, of not wanting to make any nuanced position, but just, out this, etc., then yes, but I would say extremist, yes, populist, not necessarily.
Okay, next. I have also a limit for afterwards.
I have two. One is a technical thing that I didn't get. It may be my fault, so it's just yes or no. Is the sample that you use all the political party systems, or only the ones where issue entrepreneurship takes place? Okay, so you have both the negatives and the positives.
Yeah, because there's also some that we don't have anything. Yeah.
And I wasn't entirely clear. Then there's a question which sort of follows up on what Nikita says. That on the left you have two. I don't know if this is true on the right as well. But on the left you have two versions of what you talk about. One is the left that rejects the EU, that sort of wants to repatriate sovereignty, and the other one is the one that says the EU is a neoliberal project. We need a left-wing EU rather than no EU. How do you see those dynamics playing out? They clearly have different implications for the way you set it up, yeah?
And that's a very good question. I have to think about it a little bit, but I agree with that, and probably it's also on the right to some extent, but we have some differentiation in how constructive they are with regard to the EU, right? If they are willing to reform within the current boundaries, or are they rejecting the entire project? I do think, and I'm going to now go beyond the leap because I cannot say that on the basis of the data, but as I said this morning, I do think that there's been a qualitative shift, that in many, many countries now, what we are talking about, so this is the 14 West European countries except Luxembourg, we didn't have data, that it's now salonfähig, to use the German word, or it's done to reject the EU entirely. And that, for a long time ago, you could only be like reformist in some sense. But in many, many systems now, you're able to get that agenda. If they really, I'm not clear if they really would go that far, or if it's just a rhetoric in the campaign, and then they, Geert Wilders is MEP that I talked to. It's very difficult to talk to the Positive Freedom. He said that he's sitting in the European Parliament, just like Nigel Farage sitting in the European, or was sitting in the European Parliament, and that they want to change the EU or dismantle the EU from within. That's what he said. I mean, what that exactly means.
Okay, let's move now to the next presentation by Lyberaki, Professor of Economics at Panteion University, and also member and Vice President of the political party called Action and Greece.
Right. Thanks a lot for inviting me here, and it's a great pleasure to share some thoughts with you. I haven't prepared a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit boring, but I'm going to be brief nevertheless. Let me just give you very briefly the background. The parties that used to struggle to enter into parliament in Greece have been catapulted to center stage since year 2010. And this applies on the left and on the right equally. On the left, Syriza jumped from 4% to close to 30%, while on the right, the Nazi Golden Dawn from below 1% shooted to 7% in 1913 and in 2012, and now hits double digits in the polls. Also, extreme nationalist independent Greeks, ANEL, from nothing to 8%. So the former mainstream parties tend to wither away, as we used to say in the communist speak of the 70s. They seem terribly squeezed, and PASOK from 42% got only 13%, and now single digits in the polls. So I would like to raise 3 points in a way of offering some comments on this background. The first is that the national level can destabilize the supranational. I'm fully aware that the discussion of this meeting is about the effects of the supranational and national, But let me question this line of causality, and let me argue that in certain occasions, certainly in the Greek case, the domestic developments may have the potential to destabilize the supranational arrangements. My second point is what is a widely held view that the crisis creates extremism, populism, and neo-fascist views. I think this is a very facile reading, and I'm going to use the neo-fascist, but also the violence issue to argue for that. And my third point is the question: can something be done, and how one goes about in terms of reshaping the political landscape. Okay. Now, the national and the supranational. The origin of the debt crisis in Greece was in national shortcomings and problems which color and direct the specific shape and direction the general crisis management takes. Clearly, the crisis management would have been, at the European level, would have been very different if the crisis did not have as its epicenter Greece. Now, the Greek crisis is the outcome of three well-known deficits: the public deficit, the current account deficit, which is also a manifestation of competitiveness problems, and also governance deficit. The way the crisis developed questions some of the basic tenets of EU operation. Greek statistics took to extremes, things that happened elsewhere too. And this has pushed even Eurosceptics and people who were advocates of the national prerogative to argue for closer European oversight, to become more integrationists in a sense. Also, the crisis brought to the fore questions deliberately left unsolved, i.e. the operation of a single currency. Markets clearly thought that up till 2009 that there was a German backstop. They were proved wrong. And the EU had to invent things as they moved along. So things that are now feasible were not feasible in year 2010, like debt write-offs. Everybody now speaks that the Greek debt was not, viable from the beginning, but there was no political means of addressing it. So little else could have happened except from pretend and extend. And this means that it is easy exposed to blame the EU for Greek problems. Lots of discussion is happening concerning the fiscal multiplier controversy. I think it's totally misplaced. And of course, the political class in Greece bore unique responsibility for creating the crisis and leading Greece into it unawares. In retrospect, it appeared a totally avoidable accident, which, however, had not been avoided. The Greek political class had a knack to export its own problems internationally. For example, the referendum saga. So the supranational level had to give solution to national problems under extreme time pressure. Problems whose magnitude really threatened to destabilize the whole European project. Now, my second point: does crisis lead to extremism? I think one should think about the missing intermediate links in this. There is certainly an association between the crisis and extremism, but is it causal? To leap into the conclusion that it is causal is crass determinism of the kind that even the Greek communist youth of my younger days would have avoided. To say that one leads to the other, you need to somehow pinpoint at the intermediate steps. In the Greek case, the links were there, but they were also entirely avoidable. The extremes developed because the center was hollowed out. Mainstream parties were obviously culpable for the crisis. They did not assume any responsibility, only accused each other for the past. After the bailout, they just waited for the Troika to announce measures, and then immediately, first, the politicians expressed how much they disagreed with these measures, and secondly, how powerless they were to sort of prevent them. As for the future, they did not, and they still do not, offer any opinion or suggestion about how Greece is going to be after the memorandum experience. This clearly reminds people of the famous Cavafis poem, Waiting for the Barbarians, who did not come in the end. These people were some kind of solution. I'm afraid barbarians are the Troika, people of our age. Now, fascism and Nazism as a reaction to the crisis is a facile interpretation. There is another reading of the situation that dangerously extreme nationalistic and chauvinistic views were always part of the mainstream in Greece. The field for Nazi ideology has been kept fertile for a long time. Let me give you some few examples. History is taught at schools as a succession of bloody annihilations of inferior enemies. Second, blind self-sacrifice has always been preferred, the preferred alternative to reconciliation and understanding. Third, an aggressively exclusionary cultural and macho narrative of the world, of ourselves. Fourth, the underdog culture of being a perpetual friendless victim. The division of the world into Phil-Hellenes and anti-Hellenes, and the lack of any awareness of a world community of values. So, official ideology was never so crude, but even in its most European moments, let's recall the Semitis era, politicians were happy to coexist and not to challenge directly the national suprematist narrative. Maybe this was due to an elitist belief that these ideas, the community of values, the European project, and so on, were too sophisticated for the hoi polloi, and it was best not to upset the apple cart. But anyway, the same kind of argument applies for the issue of violence, political violence. Violence has also a long and similar history in Greece, where it's a place where the left meets the right clearly. The stories of battles, struggles, heroism, sacrifice, violent punishment figure prominently in the left and the right imagination. The process, the struggle, is stressed rather than the end. So the two extremes, symbolically and literally, met in Syntagma Square in the demonstrations linked to the Indignados in 2011. On the top half of the square, as you very well know, were the Nazis, and the bottom half of the square were the left. They both united, shouted abuse, and threatened similar violence to the parliament building facing them. And what really was the name of the game was "My enemy's enemy is my friend," and this was a kind of symbolic coexistence. So, to my view, the crisis is probably the catalyst, but not the cause for this extremism. It drew the curtain and brought into ample daylight, in full view, the very hidden realities that, although were hidden, were very much there. So my third point is, can something be done? Can one think of reshaping the political landscape? Let me give you a short quotation by a disappointed Golden Dawn supporter, a female immigrant from Georgia. she said, the political space has emptied out. If there is no point of light, then all will be clogged by black. I find this very instructive, and of course the question is, can this space be filled?
Now, the center in Greece since the 1950s, because of the early death of Kartalis and Sophocles Venizelos, has lacked strong leadership. It has tended to try to enter other parties of the left and of the right in the hope that they could influence matters by stealth. So the rhetoric remained as it was, but once in power, these people behaved in a responsible and social democratic center manner. The entries themselves, well, this strategy is a well-known Trotskyist strategy. It's called Isovismos, or entryism, I think, in English. They found themselves close to the locus of power and quite frequently were placed in well-remunerated positions of influence and of great social standing. Hence, they developed a kind of double-speak. You speak one way, but you act another. And that was quite okay as long as things were only day-to-day management, as the general picture was doing okay. But when decisions should be taken, as now, this is a disaster. Can the center find a voice after 2 generations? I don't know. Sometimes in optimistic moments I say that if Nazis, who are not high performers intellectually, manage to do it, why not the center? The question is how to overcome path dependence. Well, the truth is that everyone speaks of renewal, but what you really get is old stuff under new wrapping. For instance, the most easily elected members of Syriza in parliament were old party PASOK defectors who were very well known because they had a wide clientelistic network. Equally popular are actors, footballers, and female models.
Is this because the issues are not talked about, but renewal talk is only about persons? I think that partly this is the reason. So if I had to offer 3 suggestions, one would be to engage quickly into open political discussions about Europe, about the society, about alternatives, about policy issues, and about values as well. The second is that, to my mind, there is a need for a new political subject in the center, because you can, defectors from all parties can survive in the left, but I don't think that defectors from the academia or from the general intellectual class are going to have an impact on old and bankrupt party schemes. And the third, I think, is that Greek politicians need to acquire, for a change, the courage of conviction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonie. Well, I do have some questions as well, and I think I will move the question, but we'll move to the next presentation and we'll keep them all the questions for later. So, our last panelist is going to be Gisela Stuart, member of the House of Commons.
Do you have a presentation? No? Okay.
The same person like
Thanks ever so much. Mr. Speaker, just to switch off the microphone, usually the politicians get the message. As I was listening to the earlier 2 presentations, 2 things occurred to me. Catherine, as you were doing your piece, and I as a practitioner and you as the analyst, I was brought back to Kierkegaard, who said, life is lived forwards, but understood backwards. So maybe in 20 years' time you can do me a graph as to what I did, but I can assure you there's absolutely no time when I actually draw up my election manifesto where I say, I now need to move a little bit to the right here. Or what you do is you talk to the people and get a sense of what's going on out there.
and then you've got a kind of mainstream of what you want to stand for. And the second thing, when Antigone was talking, I thought you made a really, really important point, which is this notion that why do we think that national is bad and supranational is good? They may be both crap, and probably are. It's a question, what do they actually try and achieve? And we need to have much more focus on that. And I was also reminded of something, in 2001, the British Tory party went into a general election under William Hague, which has this key element, save the pound. And they did analysis afterwards, which I thought was very revealing, as to why they weren't successful. And they broadly came up with that you've got 10% of the people who feel strongly for, you've got 10% who feel strongly against, and the other 80%, quite frankly, don't care. And if you know that elections are won and lost by the way that the people who voted for you last time vote for you again, but a group of people who last time did not vote for you, but this time will, then if you pick a subject over which 80% of the people don't care, and the ones who've already made up their mind quite firmly, then that is not a subject you go into elections for. And I think both of you also made a very important point that actually Europe is not a left or right issue. And I think there are two questions. First of all, I have two children who, if I say to them something is either left or right, they look at me and say, "Mum, what the hell are you on about?" Because post-1989, nobody argues anymore that the state's only the answer. And even the left will say the market is part of our solution. So therefore, your old-fashioned divisions have gone. And that's the challenge for the political parties. Because in the political process, where are compromises reached? If you've got large political parties, people's parties, or the Germans were calling Volksparteien, it is their job to soak up the extremes. What do you do with the extreme opinions which are always out there? The loony on the left or the loony on the right. And the big party on the left is supposed to soak up the loony on the left, and the big guy on the right is supposed to soak up the loony on the right and dilute them. And when you no longer have this kind of natural identification, because the underpinning philosophy goes, then you have a problem. And that takes me to some fairly fundamental questions, I think, if we are worried about where the European Union goes. Now, I did with one or two around here who I thought may be competing with this, but you've all lost. I am the oldest one in here, okay? And I'm actually older than the European Union. So I remember why the common market started. And it may be worth just reminding ourselves, it was not because we wanted to be left or right, or we thought, the European Union needed to be an alternative to the United States of America. It was because, with the exception of the United Kingdom, in every living memory, they had seen the failure of the nation state. And they thought the answer, a bit like a child that either looks for God, and if God isn't what you're looking for, you think there's something out there which has the answer, which you just haven't understood. So we deliberately created an institution that was supranational, but not a government, because we thought that was the answer. And that's why some of the contradictions are still a problem at the moment. But at that point, every state in Europe, however large or small, had an alternative way in which it could relate to its neighbours. And it was called EFTA. You could have a deep political integration, or you could have a trading relationship. But in 1973, when Britain joined the common market, at a time, and I remember because I arrived in winter 73-74 in the UK, and Britain was a basket case. They did switch off the lights 3 days a week because the miners were on strike. The lights did go off, and it was a period where Britain as well, for the first time, and probably only in the last century, was beginning to doubt the virtues of the nation state. It joined what became the European Union. But it didn't mean that at that moment there was no competition of a model of relating to your neighbours anymore. And that was a challenge I think the European Union has not grown up to, because it means we're now talking about politicizing the European Union to actually to stand for something which has values which can be changed. Because remember, what are elections about? I kick out those who are in government now and get another lot in. You don't do that in the European Union. It's the same lot over and over again. And to me, I don't know about you, but I need to be constantly reminded of my own follies and sometimes also of other people's follies. So I have little souvenirs, which some of them, if they're small enough, I carry around just to remind me of when something loses the plot. And my little souvenir, which I carry in my handbag, is this. And it's called, can you read it without your glasses?
My fundamental rights in the European Union.
And I picked that up on a visit to Malta at the height of the Libyan crisis, when the Maltese were tearing their hair out over the Libyan refugees. Quite a number of them actually thought they were already in Italy. And they're saying, what do we do? And we went to the European Commission office in Malta, and they had this big bowl there, full of these, in all the languages of the European Union. And I said, and what do you do? They said, oh, we bring the people of Malta closer to the European Union. I said, how are you doing? We've got that. They're fantastic. And I picked this up and I thought, if anybody has ever lost their marbles, you just have right now. Your island is being overrun by refugees. And what's the European Union, the Commission's office's response? We'll give you little books, which I can't even read without my glasses, even my valise. So that is the real challenge of the European Union. What does it stand for? And that comes back to that we've got to go back what the fundamentals of democracy is. And I feel slightly hesitant to do this, given where I am. And it reminds me of the European Convention. There was a wonderful moment, and I really shouldn't tell it, but I am. It's when Peter Hain, who a lovely colleague, told a Greek MEP, Giorgio came up with an idea, and Peter turned around to me and said, Giorgio, I really don't know how this translates into Greek, but what you're talking about is Cloud Cuckoo Land. And Cloud Cuckoo Land. And Giorgio just said, Peter, I've read my Aristophanes. I know what Cloud Cuckoo Land is all about. And it was this sort of kind of wonderful clash of cultures without them realizing that, they're was trying to tell what the essence was. And democracy is, let's just go back what it is. It is the space within which the people collectively can express their will. And it's not by ballot papers or elections or what have you. They're the symptom, the expression of a process which we have to go through. And the challenge we have is between striking the balance, and you go back to Pericles' funeral oration. Why was Pericles' funeral oration so spectacular? Is because he was the first one who defended democracy, having been fully aware of the dangers of mob rule. That has always been the tension. If you give the people their say, how do you not make it mob rule and we are the lowest common denominator? That's why you have the political parties, why you soak up the extremes. You have the mechanisms which ever so often you can get rid of those in charge and say, I've given you a chance, now get out. So that's the thing, and the other thing which I say this as a Brit now, and usually it doesn't matter who you are, but on this occasion I think it does. I'm Bavarian, I'm German, and I went to Britain in 1973. I'm not a little Englander. I have no fear of federalism. I've lived in a federal state, and I know it's not a danger. However, I think there's a fundamental difference which I've understood since living in Britain, is that some people for whom sovereignty is a deeply important thing, and the others are internationalists and sovereignty doesn't matter. That's the dividing line. It's not left and right. It's sovereignty internationalism. And that's why David Cameron's got a huge problem, because the EPP, his natural political family in the European Union, is deeply integrationist. He is friendless. And the British political system, it finds it difficult, because why did the British socialists under Neil Kinnock become pro-European up to that point? Tony Blair first stood for election in 1983 asking for withdrawal of the common market, because we thought this was this great capitalist conspiracy. But then Margaret Thatcher wouldn't give us workers' rights. The European Union did. Suddenly the British Labour Party became pro-European. So that's your divide. So the other big divide, which again, given that Britain is not in the euro and by the way, I'm really amazed that we haven't talked more about the euro. We're equating EU and the euro as the same thing. No, folks. My view is the euro is your problem, not the European Union, but we can talk about that later, is that you have got a political view which says there is a right answer out there, and if you only talk about it long enough, you will discover it. A very Catholic teleological approach to problem solving. And the Anglo-Saxons and other seafaring nations understand you can never control the waves, all you get back is the best solution at any given time, and therefore you must be adversarial. So for the Brits and the Anglo-Saxons who go for make your case and I tell you whether we try it or not, makes it so fundamentally difficult. So to sort of sum up the challenge we've been set, because it says about the European political parties, I think it's the absolute perfect storm. And the perfect storm is one, we've got political party formations. And again, you know, Catherine, it was very interesting when you said you weren't going to the Eastern European countries because your political structures aren't there. And by the way, fascinating, Germany is now run by two people, both its president and its chancellor, who came from East Germany. Go back and read how that generation of East German politicians decided which political party they would join. Really interesting process. So our left-right divisions aren't there anymore. We're not accepting that unless the European Union in its way it's organized actually becomes something which is a choice of political directions rather than endless bureaucratic structures, and an ability to soak up extremes in a way which is not the kind of coalition forming where the electorate says, you know what, it really doesn't matter how I vote, because once I've voted, you guys disappear in a dark room and it doesn't matter. You know, Germany, the Economist today is saying Merkel has had the biggest success in the election, but actually she got to form a coalition and the policies will be more left-wing than they were before she came in because of the process. Unless we address these kind of things, I think whatever the malaise is, and whether you think the malaise is good or bad, it will only get worse. And as Lampedusa once said, things have got to change dramatically if we want them to stay the same. So change is in the air, and we may not yet like it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have still some time, half an hour at least, for questions and comments and discussion. And I'm sorry for example, any problem because any question? Yes.
I have a question for Catherine. One is
Can you take the mic?
oh, sorry. So it's two questions. One on paper, the other one not. First one is, can you tell how stable these gains out of organization remain? Because for a very long time is fine. So I think that's really interesting. And the other one is, what do you think about entrepreneurs choosing the issue of, oh, we really need to reform our domestic institutions? Because I think everybody's now convinced that that should happen, but nobody's really pushing for it. So what's going on?
Right.
Or, I mean, I don't know if we want to collect it. It's fine by me.
I would say you answer this one and then we'll go.
So let me do the domestic institutions first, and that was also, I think, where both Gisela and Antigone, were raising in terms of this is not a discussion about is the EU good and domestic bad. There's a lot of these parties, I mean, also related to what Nikita was asking before about populism. A lot of these parties, like Wales in the Netherlands, maybe Lincoln a bit less in Germany, but you know, a lot of these, what we would see populist right, are also saying that, you know, your national politics is worth nothing, right? Your national elites are worth nothing. So I think, so what, and I didn't talk so much about it, but I think why these parties are also gaining so much traction, because actually it is quite believable what they're saying, given what they're also domestically saying. Right? If they're domestically saying to cleanse our elites, right? Because those things basically our politicians sold us out by not highlighting the problems of immigration for such a long time, right? That's his thing. the same thing is saying Barroso is not telling the truth because this was all there, we shouldn't have let Vries in, all these kind of things. So it's very much the same rhetoric at both levels, so it's very coherent. Whereas a lot of mainstream parties find themselves in difficult conundrums, going, well, domestically we think this, and so yes, I think maybe being an extra selling point for them, right? That they're basically criticizing all forms of representative democracy in the mainstream way, not necessarily in representative democracy as such, but in the way that mainstream parties have done that. And then with regard to how stable, so another paper which we've written is then to see, which I didn't talk so much about, are these issuepreneurs also electorally successful? So are they also gaining traction on the EU? So what we then do is see if you make a distinction between government parties or current government parties, then parties who have always alternated between government, you know, like let's say in the British case it would be UKIP versus Labour and Tories and maybe Lib Dems. That UKIP gains much more traction from the EU issue than any of those other parties. So they seem to be capitalizing on this. However, these new links with these new parties, I told you the analogy with the bench, right? The links between traditional parties and, or like the coaches, the traditional coaches and the bench members are not strong anymore, as Gisela was highlighting as well. Also, the linkages between these new parties and the parties on the bench are not strong either. So it means that you can have, you had the Panteion in the Netherlands, then you have Geert Wilders, you had, you can have all different varieties of that's on the same theme. So yes, they're getting traction from this, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be an electoral force in the same way every election, but the sentiment, I think, is something that we have to deal with. However, the party expression that's getting might be different at different points in time.
Okay, I think I will collect that question. So now it's Manuel and then Bruno.
I'll have, well, one of the questions I think in a way you already answered it, but it was mostly about these parties get a lot of success, but once they get into parliament and into day-to-day politics, in a lot of cases they start being seen as with the same vices as they were condemning. And in a lot of cases they start being divided once they have to take decisions. I think in Italy, the last case in Italy is going to be, it's already being like that. The other question is the unfair question. It's the question about the East, the part that you didn't study. The East is a strange phenomenon of countries that were very, very pro-European, and very fast they became very Eurosceptic, even in not in the extremes, even the mainstream parties, not of course in a very radical way, but in a very, in some cases almost in a radical way, but they became very Eurosceptical in their views. One of the reasons for this, at least some people point that, is the difference between the right wing and the church in the Western countries, which after the Second World War they were always internationalist, the mainstream right-wing countries, right-wing parties, I mean, and in the East, since they were associated with the nationalist church, they were very they were very pro-Europe, when pro-Europe means turning their backs on the USSR, but after that they went for the essence, which was the nationalist. Do you have any other studies, or do you have any feeling about the Eastern countries that was like? Thank you.
Yeah, and Elias, please.
Thank you. Points in reaction to the presentation we heard, which were quite interesting, and I think will help us advance in our analysis of the overall problem. The first point is actually a question, maybe I could put it in the form of a question to Antigone, which is to say, you showed very well how, let's say, the Greek political system exported its problem to the European level. And this prompts me to ask, is there some chance that having exported the problem, it can also import the solution from the European level? By which I mean the following. I'm struck by the fact that in another country that is driven by the same kind of problems as to say Italy, with a political system that falling apart and unable to reform itself, unable even to decide on the Berlusconi situation as is claimed now, so that the decisions that can be made by the judiciary. Many people on the left and on the right seem to kind of expect that the way out of paralysis will come not from within but from without. That is to say, it's by articulating some domestic political force with some European counterpart that movement can take place. After all, this is how the left and the Communist Party in particular reformed itself 20 years ago, and by using the European Socialist Party in order to, let's say, take some distance vis-à-vis the Soviet Union first and communist ideology afterwards. Really on the right, people expecting the same thing to happen, and that is to say, want somehow that we have gotten with Berlusconi to recreate a centrist party, which will be the Italian branch of the European People's Party. Of course, it might be said that this was already attempted at the previous election, where Monti was obviously the candidate against Berlusconi, and the reason one can say is that it did not do him any good, in the sense that he miserably failed in the attempt to get elected. But, I mean, political integration also means that the ability to play on a multi-level ball game in order to try and move at times from one level to the other in order to get the kind of results you think are necessary for your own political system. Now, this brings me to a more general remark, which is about what is it that we're looking for. Of course, what we heard in this afternoon's presentation is that it is important in any system that calls itself democratic to there be a clear linkage between the citizens and the rulers, and as important, between the citizens and the policies that are delivered to them. My question is, does this quest for more responsiveness in terms of policies naturally translate into what we call politicization? Is it clear that we need this vector called political party? I say this because I was impressed last week by looking at figures on trust in the French society, where actually the score of political parties in those figures, political parties in general, quite irrespective of the ideology, it was quite appalling. I mean, they got a support level which was below that of the army or even the Catholic Church, which are not extremely popular institutions in the French society. So why is it? Do you know of any country in which political parties are popular? East or west, north or south? So why is it that we insist on this vector of politicization? Can't we get somehow responsiveness without necessarily some, at least, of the evils which are attached to politicization in our respective political system? This is the question.
Thank you very much. I will build my own answer to ask the question as well as an obligation. And I have two questions, very brief ones I will try to make them. One is for Catherine, which actually, I mean, it's not really for Catherine, it's more for Gisela than for Catherine, but it will take, I will try to combine the two views. I think your views is a bit extrapolated from the previous case. The division which I like very much from Britain, I think it clearly describes very well sentiments about the EU. It is very British. I think in the EU, the main problem for the EU, and that is what is linked to Catherine's general thesis, is immigration. And as you said, you remember the EU, maybe before the sort of wave of immigration and general the issue of immigration becoming important to national politics. To me, it's a clear case of lack of representation. It's the one thing in issue where the elites do not represent anymore the electorate because the elites are much more pro-immigration than our Supreme Court here. And that creates also space, isn't it? That there is this hope that is happening. Some political and something gradually appears. Well, that is, of course, the only sort of way again exploited and used by new political elites rather than the very nice otherwise which I find very attractive, very Keynes sort of idea of evolution dimensions, pretty much like human existence level, for example. And the second was the first one. The second one, which is going to be needs for Antigone, I very much sort of, I think it was one of the most concise descriptions and summaries of what happened. However, I'm still puzzled about whether it was unavoidable to have the extreme rights and generally the radicalization of politics. What would be the counterfactual from 2010, or from after the municipal elections, until the point where actually the system collapsed, which I would pretty much locate in the beginning more or less of Praesidium's government. What could the elites have more specifically done differently, especially with the incumbent party and the opposition party, the main opposition party, during this period, especially in 2011, which would also be rational for their own sort of electoral interests and benefits, even at the personal level, even a very nice or very interesting otherwise pattern that you share all the citizens being easily elected coming to Pasok, even defection is very strategic. Most of the time it happens when they go back to their own constituencies and they see it's quite clear that they're going to be elected, and then they strategically choose the new, in a way, home that will allow them to be, again, to maintain their presence in the parliament. And since this seems so rational, albeit egoistic but and catastrophic, but seems very rational, I'm wondering what would be the counterfactual that could avoid, could allow us to square with the radicalization and the populism in particular. Yes, yeah.
Sorry. I would just like to ask something, Ms. Lyberaki, and I feel that I have been involved in many discussions actually in Athens, that many people claim that Golden Dawn, now that it is, according to the exit polls, according to the polls, it is the third biggest supported party now in Greece, which means that there are approximately 600,000 Greeks that they are supporting Golden Dawn. They believe that mistakenly these people, they support Golden Dawn because they want to punish the current political status quo. And they want to tell to the Greek politicians that, look, I mean, you have created or you have led the Greek economy to such a bad shape that we are punishing you and we are going to support a far right-wing party. Secondly, my feeling is that many people in Greece, they feel that there is a complete lack of rule of law, and mistakenly they are supporting Golden Dawn because, again, they want to say to the Greek politicians that we do not anymore trust you and we do not believe you. And we feel that, you know, Golden Dawn is not going to do anything. It's completely against our basic beliefs, but you have reached the limit, the ultimate limit, and for this reason I'm going now to support Golden Dawn. Thirdly, I have heard many times in Greece that people believe that this is not a liberal economy, that this economy has been a semi-governmental run capitalistic economy. And again, I'm going to support Golden Dawn because I want to change or make you believe that unless you change the way that you are listening and you are reacting to my vote, I'm going to punish you. That's a general question, and I just feel that the rise of the right-wing party, of extreme right-wing party in Greece, it doesn't have to do anything with unemployment. It has to do with unemployment and recession, but I don't think that if I use a scale, that more than 20% it has to do with the recession. If you can comment on that.
I actually have 3 questions, very brief ones. One is Stuart and one is Lyberaki. Mr. Lyberaki, do you believe that the political and media isolation of Golden Dawn will actually victimize this party in the eyes of the Greek people? And to Ms. Stuart, you said that you talk about democracy in the European Union, you have discussions and decision making. How would you, and I see that you have a different perspective regarding the EU process, the EU integration process as a migration. How would you characterize the British position right now regarding the EU budget negotiations? I mean, the United Kingdom took part in the negotiations of the first decreased EU budget, and at the same time, it plans an immorality referendum before the end of the multi-annual framework. And the second question is about the proposal of David Cameron for a unilateral referendum. Do you believe that this actually activated the European debates in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, you can say we can tell us.
Could you tell us who you are in the interest of transparency and openness? If you say it slowly, because other women like you to understand, I'm trying to say it again.
Yeah, Silence Dialogues from the Brussels-based media network Graphic.
Thank you.
I think that
Yeah, sorry, my question, to my question, can also Mr. Antonis Kamaras reply also to that question? Apologies for that, but they are the 2 people that are involved in the Greek political arena, sitting on the table, and it will be really interesting to hear your opinion.
you want to, yeah, that's for ladies.
Sort of observations we talked about in Ms. Antigone, talked quite extensively about what is wrong in the Greek society and why perhaps the Golden Dawn has risen, because we have some faults in our thoughts. We think and we see we have never gone away from a violent thingy. Do you think perhaps if the politicians, the Greek politicians, they recognize that they made mistakes and they've actually stated that to their electors and their people of Greece, perhaps the Greeks would have taken a different approach and started trusting them? Do you believe that if the Greek politicians in 2010 have raised their hand and said we've made a mistake in the way we've managed the country, instead of blaming the people of being too corrupt, the Greek people would have actually taken a different approach and perhaps have more trust to the politicians that they run them? And now to Gisela, if I could. Do you think if Britain has actually joined the European, the Euro, we'll have different results today in the European Union, and perhaps will be a different balance between the powers within Europe, and we wouldn't have run to this kind of economic troubles?
Okay, I think it's about time to collect now. We can collect enough questions. Let's start. We give the opportunity to our speakers to respond. I'll start with Catherine very briefly, and then
So with just two things I wanted to highlight. I'm not going to talk about the East, we can do it a little bit later. One about the elites not representing the Jews, Elias' point, and then your other point about the day-to-day politics and do these parties survive. So I think if any of you have ever seen The West Wing, the series, at a certain point there's Joshua, who is a strategist, my favorite character, who goes and talks about campaigns, and then he says when the economy is going well, Americans want the money, they want social spending, they go for a Democrat. When the economy is not going well, or there's even something like a war, they go for the daddy, that's the Republicans, who's going to take care of them. So why am I saying that? Is that in the survival of these parties, what's very interesting is what, and I'm not sure if it's too much of a Dutch example, but what we saw in 2010, when the economy was in the tank, right, people went back to the mainstream, because those are good managers, they're handlers of the economy. However, they don't like these people necessarily always to govern them. So if they have the luxury to deviate, they do. If they don't have the luxury to deviate because they think, you know, this is going to cost me money, they go back. So it's the manager versus the clown, if you will, right? You know, do you have the luxury to go into the extreme or not? So that was kind of what I want to say, and that also has effects if these parties are able to survive. No, they're not always able to survive because they're not very good managers. And then we can go to one small last thing about the elites not representing their views. That also calls always a little bit in. I had a big discussion with my supervisors who were Lisbeth and Hungary Marx, very pro-EU, both of them Belgian, other British. And a certain point, and I may be more skeptical, is that a lot of the time we're talking about people should have more trust in politicians and people should have, you know, elites have sold a lot of their constituents out on really important issues, on immigration. Because there's no problem with immigration. I'm sorry if you went to the streets of Rotterdam, there were real problems with immigration. My brother-in-law is Arab. I'm not, you know, it's not a racist comment. It was a factual statement. There were problems. The other thing is there are problems with the EU. You just sit. If you look to debates in Dutch Parliament, you have mainstream political, you know, politicians that for a long time were not willing to say any of it. So in that way, these extremists, I also am very, very kind of skeptical of that kind of rhetoric. But it could be a double-edged sword, right? They are also bringing a lot of people back into the arena that were very disillusioned with politics. They take them off the bench. However, the question is the balance, what you raised. Of course, when it goes into violence, we're in a different right. So what's the balance, right? The balance of getting the clown into parliament that is going to tell the mainstream parties, hey, you've not listened to this, versus them going so far that they're saying things which are not anymore legal or which are, you know. So the question is how much, you know, how are we going to be able to stabilize that kind of equilibrium? Because I'm not sure that all these forces are necessarily bad or people do not know what they're doing. No, I think a lot of people have legitimate concerns which need to be raised. And the question is, how do you channel that? And how do you know, get it off the streets or off the islands? And how do you channel that in the system? And so far, most systems have been fairly successful at doing that.
Antigone?
I need a voice that has two next.
Okay, lots of questions. Thank you very much. Can the solution to the domestic problems be imported by the EU in terms of parties, party politics? Clearly, lots of solutions are and can be imported from the EU. Solutions of a kind of bailout or of some general rules within which the government spending can proceed. I'm not sure that the political actors can have a crash course somewhere abroad and come back. I mean, it has to be done domestically. This is why I think it's so very important to highlight the responsibility of domestic political actors, because the easy way out that the party from somewhere else is going to help you uplift and improve your profile is a very mechanistic and dead-end message. So lots have to be done. Of course, support is very important, but the main the responsibility and the initiative has to come where societies are and where people live domestically. Now, was there anything that could be done since 2011? Well, this is, I like this question because this is exactly the question that all well-meaning reformist politicians have used in order to shake off any responsibility. Of course, since they came to office, the situation was so difficult, they couldn't do anything else, but the thing is with politics is that they happen continuously. You cannot, if each politician shakes off responsibility, because when he or she was meddled into the situation, there were other priorities, and I don't know, his son was passing crucial exams. This is throwing the ball out of the terrain. I mean, it's like speaking about irrelevant issues. Of course, the room for maneuver during the crisis was very narrow, but it was made narrow because of the continuous and long-standing mistakes after mistake that the same people did, and then sort of somehow forgot about them. So, could honesty, political honesty, pay off in year 2010? I think political honesty pays off. To give you my strong, firm belief. In the short term, it can make you, it can require a greater effort to stand for your views, to sort of try and address deep-seated beliefs to the contrary. But this is a politician's job. I mean, come on, who told them that they can be politicians and lay back and wait for, ideas move around society in the desirable way? I still say they, but maybe I should say we are all responsible for what ideas have, attract people or not. So, concerning the three questions, am I producing?
Exactly.
What can I do? Maybe I speak too much.
Going over your time.
Okay. No. All right. The three questions, the $1 billion. The Golden Dawn supporters trying to punish the political system. Well, part of the thing, part of this attitude is what I was trying to say before as what is considered to be a legitimate behavior and reaction in Greece. The idea of punishing, the idea of blowing up churches or schools or whatever, as a legitimate way of expressing how indignant you are the way the world is moving, is something that politicians should have taken care for many, many years ago. And if you insist in teaching school children that all about Greek identity is shooting other people or being blown up on your own accord because nobody listens to you, then no doubt Golden Dawn or left-wingers, want to punish the one or the other by shouting abuse or hitting or, even not allowing people to come out of buildings on fire and having the Marfin case of. So the punishment of the status quo and the anti-systemic stance is very well in rhetoric terms, but I think it is exactly a reflection of the problem that we're trying to highlight. The rule of law, the lack of rule of law, I totally agree that there is a problem with the toleration vis-a-vis violence, political violence. Even yesterday I was listening to a politician on the left on the radio who was saying, but how can you blame violent demonstrators who throw bombs against banks? Maybe tomorrow they will be left
without a job, maybe tomorrow they will. So the 1 million, 1.5 million jobless people now should have blown the whole continent up, not only Athens or Greece. So the rule of law is a problem, and it is a problem because there has always been politically correct in Greece to distinguish between left and right violence, between the good intentional anti-systemic left violence to the horrible pro-dictatorship or right violence, and we're paying this. I don't agree that, I agree that Greece is the last Soviet democracy in the sense that the economy is not liberal, but I don't think that any liberal person would vote for Golden Dawn because Greece is not liberal enough. So if a person comes to me with this idea, I would really like to know what he or she believes on the issue. So, and the last question about the political media isolation, which I think is an issue that is being very widely discussed right now in Greece. I believe that democracy should be equipped in order to discuss openly different views, even extreme views. What I do not believe is that democracy should be tolerant versus criminal acts in the name of political ideas. So the media should engage in discussions with Golden Dawn politicians before, and who should be also at the same time very strict and clear about what is allowed and what is not allowed in a democracy. And what is happening right now with the 98% of news time devoted to the Golden Dawn and everything else reduced into 3 minutes, I think it's going to backfire. I think it's going to create exactly the opposite effect, and I'm very, very, not only skeptical but anxious about this. I'm sure I forgot lots of things, but we can continue.
There's always discussion about as well. Okay, and last but not least, Gisela Stuart, I want to say something about
A quick one. Would things be better or worse if the UK had been part of Europe? It'd be infinitely worse for the whole lot of us. Quite frankly, I'm still one who doesn't think the euro is going to hold. I think we're going to crack, and the big problem is France, because France economically belongs to southern Europe, but politically must be part of northern Europe, otherwise the whole project would fall apart. But anyway, it's one of those subjects which is going to happen whatever I think, or whatever you think. I think there's dynamics there. The second point I just want to make about Eastern Europe. It's very easy to talk about Eastern Europe if it was kind of, these countries were all the same. But read Anne Applebaum's The Fall of the Iron Curtain, and you can see a really highly differentiated history of 1945 to 54 of how things happened in Poland, how they happened in Hungary, East Germany, and because it's a very differentiated journey. And I remember travelling around in 2003, with all the accession countries, so eight Eastern European accession countries, to them, countries like Poland were already part of NATO, but those who weren't part of NATO, to them the Prague summit admitted them to NATO was a damn sight more important than accession to the EU, wherever you went. So they approached this in terms of a physical defence security as much as the European Union. So I think the rise of what you may regard as Eurosceptic parties should not surprise anyone, quite frankly. But that takes me to, I'll talk about Cameron and things later on, because quite frankly, it depends whether it's going to win 2015. Quite frankly, I think Ed Miliband ought to promise a referendum as well, because you need to get a debate out. And I can really tell you that when Cameron promised the 2017 referendum, he wanted to kick it in the long grass rather than having any consideration that this was halfway through the budget. That would have been, but we can talk about that later on. But I want to come into something much more important. We all talked about immigration. UKIP in Britain, which may well be the largest party after the European elections in 2014,
even to UK voters, Europe only comes third in the list of priorities. It's immigration. And I want to challenge you next time, this room full of immigrants, which one of you is not an immigrant? Which one of you is not working in the country which you weren't born in? Okay, so this room full of immigrants, we all are the problem. Actually, we are also what I seem to recall is the big thing which distinguished the common market from EFTA. What was the big thing which was different? It was movement of labour. So we should not talk about immigrants, we should talk about we are the product of free movement of labour. And that very thing which was at the core of the political construct which the founding fathers thought would deliver you political integration, because once you move people, they thought you will get the political immigration, is now the thing which is seen to be the biggest problem. And we need to drill down what the problem is. I'm a Birmingham MP. In 5 years' time, we will be an ethnic minority city. Leicester already is, more non-white than white. I go to a school, I go to any gathering of 15-year-olds, and the white population is the minority. If the immigrants in Birmingham tomorrow would not work, then our 4 big teaching hospitals would grind to a standstill. There will be no taxi services. You shouldn't go and get a taxi in Birmingham on a Friday between 12:30 and 1 anyway, because they're all off to the mosque. And don't get a taxi the first day of Ramadan. I mean, there are such a... So why is immigration a problem? And Catherine made that very point. We used to say, anybody who talks about immigration is a racist. That was a big politician's mistake. Yes, that used to be the tag. But there's now an element of unfairness. My second, third generations immigrants in Birmingham are much tougher on that first generation who they regard coming in, taking without having given. I was the generation of immigrants who said you earned your right in the whole life. You earned the right by education. So that's what's come out, and I think we ought to stop calling it immigration, talk about free movement of labour, and those are not free movement of labour, and drill down what is really the problem. The real problem is a sense of unfairness, that something's going on that's no longer fair. And if we don't address that, then the extremists, it doesn't matter which correct or which side they come from, because it is those parties who instill the fear of the foreigner, the fear of the unknown. And if that gets through, then we really will be back to a place where none of us ever want to be again. So,
and that was the reason why Gisela was the last one. I'm very much close to the well. Thank you very much. Of course, we will be late. Let's try to start again in 20 minutes. So, what's the fast?
So let's make it half an hour and make the interviews.
Okay. Then, 20 minutes for